Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1036 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. My goodness, this chapter was, in every respect, unapologetically peak One Piece. I think that setup chapters get a bad rep in general, and don't get it twisted, yeah, there was some action in this chapter, but mainly it was setup. But when setup chapters or when setups are done right, they're the things that you can enjoy most. And I felt that way. This chapter had the feeling of like an end of one section, the defeat of Kaido's crew, and a transition to the final part of the Battle of Onigishima, which is against the monsters, Big Mom and Kaido. CP0 still thinks that the Straw Hats have a 1 in a million chance of defeating them, but they're preparing just in case, because if they were to defeat them, the ripples around the world would be catastrophic. And I'm sure most people have the same impression I do, but buckle up, because I think they're going down. And at the same time, there's other calamity waiting just around the corner, besides the monsters that they have to defeat. The bomb going off, so Onigishima falling, killing people, and CP0 and what comes next. But I suppose just simply stated, I mean, this is what we have been waiting for. This is what Oda has been working up towards. I assume at this point all the pieces have been laid on the table and we just gotta see how Oda fits them back together. This almost feels like a chapter which makes you want to reflect on all the hanging plot threads that we have going on, just as a refresher and to think about. And possibly most relevant among those things, clearly with in-game implications alluded to in the chapter itself, is the promise that Joy Boy is related in some way to Wano. This was the dialogue that we got from the chapter just after King was defeated, a mini flashback. Kaido says, "You still believe that, King? You think I'm a Joy Boy? Is the world I'm making really the world you wanted?" And King says, "Legends are legends. At this point, it doesn't matter what you do. I owe you my life. Just keep being the strongest, and I'll make sure to never lose until you're the king of the pirates." There's so much little nuance here that you can dive into that suggests things about Joy Boy. And you best believe I'm excited about that. But first and foremost is that King knows about Joy Boy. That is not insignificant. I mean, the only reason we know about Joy Boy in the story is from the poneglyph in Fishman Island, a letter of apology from Joy Boy to the mermaid princess during the Void Century, Poseidon. A question that we've had, I guess, for a while, or a question you could have is, how do other people know about Joy Boy if they can't read the poneglyphs, right? Robin can read the poneglyphs, that's the Straw Hats cheat code. Everybody wants Robin for this reason, yet there's still knowledge about Joy Boy out there despite the fact that the only known source is from a poneglyph. Obviously you have things like the ability to hear the voice of all things. Roger could get information from poneglyphs. How specific that is not quite established yet, but if he can hear the voice, certainly others could as well, so that could be potentially how the name Joy Boy exists. But he was also a person from the past, and legends have a tendency to be told verbally. And Joy Boy at this point appears to be a legend. Not all that dissimilar to another legend that was recently introduced about the sun god Nika. Look, a lot of words could be said here in order to justify, explain things, but I'm just going to get to the chase. Give you guys what I have as my speculation. For the longest time, we've talked about the connection between the various non-human groups and the Ancient Kingdom. The Ancient Kingdom, which created the poneglyphs to tell their story. One of their poneglyphs mentions Joy Boy. We presume that Joy Boy was the leader of the Ancient Kingdom. They then gave their poneglyphs to all these various non-human groups in order to protect. We find a poneglyph in Skypiea, protected by the Shandians, winged people. We find poneglyph in Fishman Island, 2 poneglyphs in fact. We find a poneglyph with the Minx in Zou. And I would hazard a guess that somewhere in Elbaf, the Giants are protecting another poneglyph. I think that my assumption is that just like all these non-human groups seems to have been allied with the Ancient Kingdom, and that we've also learned that the celestial dragons of the past persecuted the non-humans, drove them into hiding. That it was probably likely that the Ancient Kingdom fought with or for King's race. And again, another very obvious connection here. The Tontatas refer to their period under the rule of Doflamingo of the 20 Kings. Doflamingo family of the 20 Kings later became celestial dragons, called their time with them an era of slavery. And King's race has pretty much been wiped off the face of the planet. And then the celestial dragons took their home. This seems like a pretty strong connection. So I see the legend of Joy Boy passed down in a very similar way as the legend of the sun god Nika, or even the initial D, some remnants of the Void Century that the world government has not been able to hide and destroy. We speculated this before, and it seems incredibly likely now, but Joy Boy is a title, right? King thinks that Kaido is Joy Boy. Joy Boy, the name of Joy Boy, is some kind of prophecy. That just seems absurdly likely. And I think Kaido even alludes to at least part of the nature of this prophecy. He says, "Is the world I'm making really the world you wanted? You think I'm Joy Boy. Is the world I'm making really the world you wanted?" It seems then that Joy Boy is supposed to remake the world. Right? Kaido scoffs at being called Joy Boy, and immediately his thought is, well, if I'm Joy Boy, then the world best be prepared. And that's another thing that I find to be really interesting about this chapter. King is talking about Joy Boy, and we speculate, right, Joy Boy is a legend that's passed down among remnants of the ancient kingdom, some lines or people that they protected. Well, how does Kaido know about Joy Boy? Because King seems to bring him up, and Kaido is not asking, who's Joy Boy, right? He already knows. Again, we don't know if or how Kaido would be reading any poneglyphs. Honestly, guys, my mind immediately jumps to Rox D. Zebek. Rox D. Zebek, who wanted to take down the celestial dragons. Again, this would require a lot of words, but I have a strong suspicion that Rox thought that he was Joy Boy, or tried to be Joy Boy. Kaido had a line regarding Luffy earlier in this fight where he said, "So you couldn't be Joy Boy either." And this is obviously a topic of discussion. Some people think that Kaido is referring to himself, and that is totally plausible. Kaido could have failed to be Joy Boy in some way, and we could find this out soon. But I tend to believe that he's thinking about Rox D. Zebek when he says, "Luffy, you couldn't be Joy Boy either." It's because Rox tried and failed. But obviously this discussion is a can of worms, because there's so much that we sort of know but don't really know. Like, for instance, what is Wano's role to play in the prophecies and Joy Boy? What is the specific wording? What is it that Kaido knows? Did Rox have some, altercation or some event occur in Wano? Did he try to get into Wano but fail? Is there a story from 50 years ago in Wano that we don't know yet? In some respects, it's a lot easier just to speculate Kaido because he's been here for 20 years. But at the same time, judging from this flashback, it doesn't appear as though Kaido put much stock into himself being Joy Boy. I mean, King brings it up and he kind of laughs it off like, I guess, maybe, but I don't think so. That was my impression anyway. Regardless, there is a discussion here, obviously. If it is Rox and not Kaido, that's probably not something that Oda intends to reveal at this point in time. So it does seem ambiguous. It certainly is a question we should be asking. Did Kaido try to be Joy Boy and fail? Or was he talking about somebody else? And this leads to another question of how can you fail to be Joy Boy? Or how would Kaido have been certain that he failed to be Joy Boy? That's another way in which Rox makes more sense to me, because Rox was supposedly defeated and most likely killed. Failure here is a little bit more obvious. But let's switch gears a little bit here, because there's some other things that we could potentially learn from this flashback. King thinks that Kaido is Joy Boy, and Kaido obviously laughs it off. But then we have like a thought bubble within King's flashback from King himself, in which he thinks, "And I'll make sure to never lose until you're king of the pirates." This is sort of juxtaposed, it seems related to the idea of Kaido being Joy Boy. And I wonder if there's a connection here, like Joy Boy is supposed to become the king of the pirates, or is the king of the pirates. King doesn't think, "And I'll make sure to never lose until you're Joy Boy." No, it's until you're king of the pirates. So maybe the legend of Joy Boy is related to becoming the king of the pirates. This is obviously a thing that matches up very well with my headcanon because I do believe that the Ancient Kingdom was a kingdom of pirates. Joy Boy, being the leader of the Ancient Kingdom, supposedly would then be the king of the pirates. So the terms in my headcanon are somewhat interchangeable, which fits here. But this is also another discussion that we need to have now, right? Because this chapter essentially confirms that Joy Boy is a title. You can become Joy Boy, or you are always destined to be Joy Boy. It's a legend, some kind of prophecy that at some point in time somebody will fulfill. So we have the poneglyph in Fishman Island about an apology from Joy Boy to the mermaid princess supposedly 900 years in the past. How does this make sense, right? How do you have a Joy Boy of the past and a Joy Boy now? We've talked about this before and I want to lay out my speculations once more. First off, reincarnation. Reincarnation is a concept much more familiar to the East than it is to the West, but could very well be present in One Piece. Essentially, the soul of Joy Boy, the person who Joy Boy is, can be reborn. Just like the mermaid princess Poseidon powers, basically that person or those powers are reborn. So they're waiting for the soul of Joy Boy to be reborn. This would sort of suggest that each person's soul lives multiple lives, which again is a normal thing, is a familiar thing with Eastern cultures. It also works incredibly well with the concept of the inherited will, because your soul has things left once your body dies that it still wants to accomplish, so it gets another life in order to perfect itself, achieve its desires. But another theory that I really like, and I brought up before, and it's kind of mind-blowing if you think about it, we just presume, right, that the letter of apology that is on the poneglyph in Fishman Island, that was a conversation or something recorded from the distant past. Basically, Joy Boy was a character from the Void Century. But why can't it be another prophecy? A small piece of recording of the legend of Joy Boy which has yet to be fulfilled. It isn't a conversation that has already happened and a letter of apology that has already occurred. It is one that will, meaning it hasn't happened yet. So guys, so that you keep with me here, if we're presuming that Luffy is Joy Boy, pretty common speculation, then this is a conversation that Luffy will have, an apology that he will make to Shirahoshi. And Oda's been a sly dog. I'm sure that a lot of people will think that this is crazy, because if you go back to chapter 649 in Fishman Island, where the legend of Joy Boy is discussed, it's pretty explicit, right? Robin asks King Neptune, who is Joy Boy? And he says, I'll tell you everything I know. Joy Boy is a person who lived on the surface during the 100-year void, so at least 800 years ago. That message was meant for the mermaid princess on the island at the time. It was an apology for breaking a promise made with Fishman Island. Promise? The contents of that promise are not clear, but someone will come along to fulfill the promise in Joy Boy's stead, at least according to the royal legend. So we believed in that day and uphold our part of the promise by protecting Noah through the generations, for it is not until the day the promise comes about that Noah will fulfill its actual purpose. Right, so this is very clear-cut and explicit. Joy Boy was a person from the Void Century. But there's always the potential that, as is normal, legends sort of lose their truth over time, or the truth changes or is lost. Roger, the only person who actually collected the true history and read all of the poneglyphs and knew what occurred exactly, said that he would have loved to live during Joy Boy's time, which is a very ambiguous statement. Of course, you can think, oh, well, he's talking about, I wish that I could have lived during the Void Century. Or maybe he's talking about, he wished he could have lived during the time in which Joy Boy is supposed to arrive and save the world, which would have been the future, not the past. And do you see how much more sense that makes? Why would Roger have wanted to live during the Void Century? Wouldn't he have preferred to live in the world that Joy Boy is supposed to create? That makes more sense to me. Essentially an admission that he too is not Joy Boy. So how exactly does this make sense to me, so that we can be very clear, right? It's obvious that Luffy is probably Joy Boy, he's going to save the world, so then every promise that he makes to Fishman Island is going to be fulfilled during his life. So why would a letter of apology be necessary? Well, what is the one promise that Luffy has made to Fishman Island so far? Luffy said that he will protect Fishman Island, because Big Mom can't. We also know that somebody is supposed to destroy Fishman Island. Ergo, Luffy's promise to Fishman Island will be broken. Guys, it could really be that simple. And this is a conversation and a letter of apology that has not actually occurred yet. It is a prophecy of what will. King Neptune even says that the promise that Joy Boy made is not clear. They don't know what that promise is. All they know is that they need to keep Noah safe for the promised time, because Fishman Island is going to be destroyed, and they're going to use Noah to help protect the fishermen and bring them up to the surface. So the promise that Luffy will fail is that he won't protect Fishman Island. That's how that makes sense. But anyway, my last speculation, I think that this is less likely, but I want to bring it up anyway, is that Joy Boy was actually a person that existed during the Void Century, but was not a soul reincarnated. Luffy does not have Joy Boy's soul. It's merely a person who thought that they were Joy Boy. The legend of Joy Boy was created around this time. This person heard that legend and thought that was who they were, and they took that name falsely. Like I said, I don't believe this, but it's possible. Either way, guys, these speculations about Joy Boy I think are going to be very relevant soon. But even then, we won't know the full story until we reach Laftel and all of the various pieces come together into a complete picture. I think the main thing that is likely to be revealed soon is the legend of Joy Boy and many of the things that Joy Boy is supposed to do. And I think likely, I feel this way, Oda's going to try and create the impression that Luffy is Joy Boy, that there's certain signs of Joy Boy's coming, whether it's related to Wano or the various things that this person is supposed to do, and Luffy's going to fit. And we might even learn about the things that Joy Boy is supposed to do in the future, or Luffy's supposed to do, but he hasn't yet. And that's going to create an expectation of what's going to come. Likely something that will hype us up, but at the same time may not go exactly as you may think. Something very clear-cut in my opinion, I feel strongly that this will happen, is the misunderstanding or the confusion about the ancient weapons, right? The world government is so afraid of these world-destroying weapons. I think it's almost guaranteed that Joy Boy is supposed to collect the ancient weapons and use them in order to reshape the world. And so somebody who hears this prophecy will want the ancient weapons, like Kaido or Big Mom or others. And their intention will be to use them as weapons to destroy the world or destroy the celestial dragons in the world government. But there's some very interesting and, in my opinion, obvious, subtle context that the ancient weapons were never supposed to be used as weapons, despite having intrinsic power and ability. And this makes a lot of sense when looking at someone like Shirahoshi, her personality. Yes, she has a powerful ability, but she is not a warrior, and to use her in battle or even attempt to is probably wrong. Like is explained in Joy Boy's poneglyph about the Noah, right? Poseidon's ability is supposed to be used to save people. And I think that the other ancient weapons are supposed to have a similar purpose, of not killing, but protecting. Another common speculation is that Pluton, which is supposed to be a warship capable of destroying islands, isn't supposed to destroy islands, is instead designed or supposed to destroy the Red Line, which will, in effect, reshape the world, but is not supposed to be used to hurt people. I think this is a relevant concept to keep in mind. Luffy obviously would never force anybody to do anything that they didn't want to do, and if Shirahoshi doesn't want to hurt anyone, Luffy won't force her, but others won't think that way, and I think that that's going to be a plot point. But we've already talked about Rox and his pretty clear desire to take down these celestial dragons, kill all the celestial dragons, become king. Well, there's another character in the story that also appears to be against the celestial dragons, and that is Dragon. I'm just throwing this out there because it's a theory that I really like, but does Dragon think that he is Joy Boy? Also, if you look at the silhouette of Rox, I think that the character that Rox silhouette most reminds me of is Dragon. Throwing that out there. You guys know that I'm down for a bit of drama. Some unexpected twists and turns that you weren't predicting. And this is just one of those that is just, it could be really, really good. And before Luffy's other grandfather is Rox D. Zabak. Right now, we don't know what the Revolutionary Army's plan is, but I think it's very curious about the timing here, right? They attack the Celestial Dragons. They declare war on the Celestial Dragons literal days before Joy Boy is supposed to make himself known, or something to that effect relating to Wano. Oda has also established a connection between the Revolutionary Army and Wano, because the Revolutionary Army were looking for the weapons produced from Wano. For the longest time, I've said this a million times, there's got to be purpose there. It's through Wano that it's likely that the Revolutionary Army will find the evidence needed to confirm that the world government has their hands in the pirate world and the underworld. Essentially, it is through Wano that the biggest secrets of the world government can be revealed to everybody. Their corruption, and this is something that the Revolutionary Army has to want. Dragon has declared war on the Celestial Dragons, and so in this, his plan has to be to turn the world against them. There is a reason that Oda included the Revolutionary Army in Dressrosa, looking at Doflamingo's weapons, trying to find Wano. It would then make double sense if Dragon or the Revolutionary Army would show up at some point during this arc or afterwards. If Dragon thinks himself Joy Boy and knows some of the signs. You know, I don't think I've ever actually made like an official video about this, but it's basically, the theory is evil Dragon, where everyone presumes that Dragon is another version of Shanks, basically. That at some point in the story, Luffy will need help and Dragon will show up and help him. And that's totally plausible. I think that a lot of people would love that, and if it went that way, it's not a problem, right? But it's also really interesting if Dragon doesn't play that role, where Dragon actually is kind of like Garp, somebody who stands in Luffy's way, but isn't doing so to be evil. He just stands for something different. And at some point in time, he has to come to terms with that. It's just one of those conversations that I love to have, right? It's, you know, we obviously know that Luffy is going to defeat the Celestial Dragons, most likely. And at this point in the story, the Celestial Dragons are a clear-cut enemy. You know, it's like Blackbeard and the world government. One of these two factions is going to be the last boss. But there's a reason why Dragon isn't the hero of the story. I think pretty much everyone speculates Dragon's path is going to be very similar to Shanks, that basically Dragon is another version of Shanks, that just like Shanks, Dragon wants the same things that Luffy wants, will be at some point some kind of mentor figure, and we'll discover that this entire time he's known Luffy's potential and has cultivated him to be the best version of himself. Then he will be defeated and Luffy will inherit his will. But I do secretly hope it's a bit more complicated than that. We talked about how, well, the ancient weapons aren't supposed to be used as weapons. They're not meant to kill, right? But somebody like Dragon, you get this sense, or at least I get this sense of almost like malevolence towards the Celestial Dragon. Rip them into little tiny pieces and parade them in front of the masses. Like, I don't know if he's that bad, but I get some serious vindictive vibes. And that's not really in Luffy's spirit at all. I would never speculate that about Luffy, but Dragon has a hardness about him in which it seems totally feasible. And it's also interesting to me that we see Shanks have a conversation with the Gorosei, warning them about a pirate. We also know that when Rox D. Zebek wanted to defeat the Celestial Dragons, who stood in his way? Roger did. So in this, we can kind of see that Shanks and Dragon aren't on the same side. They don't want the same things. Shanks obviously does want the Celestial Dragons to go down, but he believes that Luffy is the person who is going to do that. Probably believes Luffy is going to be Joy Boy, which is the person that Roger was waiting for, who's also probably supposed to be a D. But in that, somebody like Dragon, who is doing his own thing, is a kind of enemy. That's interesting. I'm a firm believer that taking down these Celestial Dragons is not the most perfect solution that it is presented to be at this moment, right? Roger and Rayleigh read the true history. And when the Straw Hats and Robin asked about that, Luffy obviously didn't want to hear it because it would ruin the adventure. But Rayleigh says, you know, maybe when you go through the journey and you discover everything that we do, maybe you'll come to a different conclusion. To me, I think that, that once we get to the end, it's not going to be so obvious that taking down these Celestial Dragons is the right answer, or the way in which you do it is going to be important. I think Rayleigh indicates some doubt about whether or not he and Roger found the answer, despite knowing everything. So it may turn out that Rox, when he wanted to take down these celestial dragons, and Dragon, who obviously wants to do the same thing, whether or not they are actually doing the right thing, or doing it in the right way. And honestly, this aligns with, the prophecy stories that I like, right? That's not, there's things that the prophecy says that somebody will do, and people try to follow in the footsteps, and it's not usually right. They are not. If you try to be the person of prophecy, you're usually not that person. It may seem obvious how to interpret it, but most likely, especially in the context of a story like this, Luffy's gonna accomplish these deeds as Joy Boy in a very surprising way. But anyway, we got a little bit sidetracked from the chapter itself. Basically, the first part here focused on the end of Zoro's battle with King. I personally, just in retrospect, having completed the battle, I think that this was right. It felt right for Zoro to defeat King. There's still so much story and tension and stakes surrounding Zoro because he is literally killing himself. He can't have much left to give. And that's what's alluded to at the conclusion of the fight. If this is what it takes, I'll be the king of hell. Basically, in order to not lose again, Zoro is saying that it's going to take him killing himself, which thematically relates to the chapter as a whole, which is titled Bushido is the Way of Death. And Usopp's conversation and speech towards Kinemon and Kiku that, above all else, they should continue to live. But they are dead set on being left for dead. Zoro here has an opportunity to leave the battlefield. He has defeated his opponent, he has done his part, he can fall to the ground and survive. But instead he chooses to re-enter, likely I think to attempt to fight against Kaido. And in doing so, it's almost suggested that he believes that he will die. And the wordplay here is very interesting to me. I don't know how much I want to read into this or how much I will, but Zoro's declaration from when he was a kid was that one day his name would reach the heavens. And now we see Zoro saying, well, if this is what it takes, then I'll be the king of hell. You guys see that? You think that that's intentional? Honestly, this conversation about Bushido and the culture of samurai, it shocked me in this chapter. I was not expecting Oda to say these kinds of things. It's not too often that I dislike a thing from a chapter because I'm a One Piece fan, right? And I generally like what we're given, and I'm curious as to what role that it'll play. But every so often I go on a rant. And one of my rants, which was really unfortunately timed because it was during one of the best parts of Wano, was the end of the Oden flashback. Because it bothered me that Oden and Toki seemingly gave up when they had children. Momonosuke and Hiyori needed them. They wanted them alive and around, and they both died when they had the opportunity to live, and it bothered me. I felt like at the time that was the wrong message. And Oda delivered in this chapter with what I think, in my opinion, my philosophy is the right answer. Above all else, try to survive. It's still obviously a little unclear because Oda's been hiding some things about the prophecy of Joy Boy, what exactly Oden knew and how he knew it. But there's just this general sense from the end of the Oden flashback that he knew what would happen. That he fought Kaido, he gave it everything that he had, but he was going to lose. And at some point in time, his mentality switched to, I'm counting on the person who is supposed to arrive in 20 years to defeat you, and that is not me. And while this is all well and good, I think that he had the opportunity to survive. Toki, nobody knew about Toki's powers. Toki could have visited them in the jail cell, him and all of his subordinates, and transported them all to the future, but Oden seemed dead set on dying. And the same seemed true of Toki. There was a point in time where Toki could have chosen to survive herself. She transported literally everyone to the future, and as of right now, what we are led to believe is that after doing so, she died. She chose to die. I think accepting one's death is a powerful thing. I think that smiling in the face of death is a powerful thing, something I wouldn't change from One Piece. But there's a difference between smiling in the face of death and giving up. I don't care if there's some sort of prophecy that exists that all your problems will be solved in the future. You fight. And I think that if you asked Luffy would say the same thing. He doesn't give a rat's arse about what Joy Boy will do. If Luffy reached some sort of moment where it was clear that he wasn't Joy Boy and that the world would have to wait for hundreds of years more, Luffy's not going to care. He's going to protect his friends to the very bitter end. Always. You can accept death and yet still fight to the very last ounce of your being, and I didn't get that impression from either Oden or Toki. And I think Oda, in a roundabout way, is sort of explaining that now as a product of samurai culture, bushido. As Usopp sounds off on Kiku and Kinemon, he is also criticizing Zoro, right? Like, that wasn't explicit in the chapter, but it was implicit. It was a subtle connection that it's just there. Bushido is the way of death. Who among the Straw Hat crew follows Bushido? Zoro. Could also be a criticism of Jinbei. In my opinion, this idea is what transformed this chapter from a great, amazing chapter to, oh my god, for me. Oh, how the tables have turned. Back in Water 7, you see Zoro criticizing Usopp, and the way that he conducted his business, his mindset, really. Well, now Usopp is criticizing Zoro. And in fact, he's also criticizing Sanji, because what did Sanji say to Zoro just a few chapters ago? If it seems like I've changed, something's off with me, then kill me. That's not the Straw Hat way. Straw Hats don't give up, no matter the odds, no matter the circumstances. Perseverance and determination are paramount, and it applies not only when fighting and trying to defeat your enemies. Usopp is saying that sometimes the right answer is to run away. What exactly did Zoro say to Mihawk in chapter 51? Mihawk asks Zoro, "You want your guts cut out? Why don't you retreat?" And Zoro says, I can't. If I retreat even one step, my vow, my ambition, everything I care about will be shattered, and all my dreams will be lost forever. I prefer death to defeat. Well, it's pretty clear that Usopp disagrees. It may look pathetic to keep struggling with tears and snot running down my face, but I don't care. I'll never stop clinging to life. You have to keep going. Even if it's in disgrace, dying after coming this far would be a waste. This is Usopp talking to Zoro, and you can see that. Knowing this, how can you not love this moment? This is drama waiting to happen. Oda is criticizing Zoro through Usopp. And even though Zoro said that thing about why he is the way that he is, I'm just telling you guys that it seems very straightforward and clear to me that in this battle of philosophy, Zoro is wrong. Look, I'm as big of Zoro fan as anyone. I understand Zoro tards or whatever. Everything Zoro does is cool. Man, I'm right there with you. But I also know how other, fans of other characters of the Straw Hats that are more fans of other characters than Zoro can see how toxic Zoro fans are. Because any criticism of Zoro whatsoever is met with pretty strong resistance. Zoro is always right, always. There is never any time that he's wrong, so when Zoro says something, you better listen, and that's the truth. It's almost as if you can call any Straw Hat stupid for the various stupid things that they do, but Zoro is off limits. Because Zoro represents everything that is right. And although I am a Zoro fan, I disagree. In this, I think that Zoro is wrong. That is some high-tier brainwash BS. All your vows, all your ambitions, everything that you stand for is not undone if you live to fight another day. This, in my opinion, is the glorious subtext of this whole chapter. Bushido is the way of death. Oda is setting up that Zoro is literally killing himself. He is going back to the battle because he cannot retreat. He must continue forward. And in doing so, he is acknowledging that this is likely the path to his death. And in this, if his name cannot reach the heavens, he will become the king of hell. I truly wonder if this line, obviously no one's going to read this way, the first way through, but I wonder if this line from Zoro, I guess I'll be the king of hell, is Zoro moving the goalposts of his dreams, preparing himself to be ready to fail, preparing himself to be ready to die before he is defeated. Either way, it's my opinion that Oda has been setting up this conflict for a very long time. It is incredibly unlikely that Zoro is going to be allowed to go through the entirety of the story without ever retreating once. A lot of people make a big deal about, well, they said that they're going to do it, so they're going to do it. But we've already talked about in this review, right? Luffy said he would protect Fishman Island, but newsflash, he's probably not. Luffy said that he would defeat all of the Yonko. That includes Shanks. Therefore, Luffy will defeat Shanks in battle, obviously. Don't think so. Promises are not prophecies of what will occur. At least not every time. I think that there has to be a point at some time where Zoro's faced with a crisis. Defeat or death, choose. Can Zoro live with defeat? Because everyone fails eventually. No matter how gifted, strong, how great your will is, everybody fails. And this is why it's so poignant that this message comes from Usopp, who is the everyman. He represents us, everyday Joe. He's not superhuman, he fails all the time, but he gets back up. He'll run for as long as it takes for him to eventually find the answer and turn back around. Usopp exists to constantly teach us of the value of facing your fears, overcoming them. Zoro needs that message, in my opinion. Or at least I think that there's some kind of compromise here, or some middle ground that we may not see, that might be explained further as Zoro as a character is explained further, which is one of those things that I just love so much about One Piece. We go through Whole Cake Island, right? And I feel as though a lot of people learned a lot about Sanji. Even though this was 850 chapters into the story, we learned a lot about Sanji in that arc that was not obvious. And I think the same is true with Zoro. It's 900, over 1,000 chapters now. But Zoro, there's still things about Zoro that Oda can say. Like, for instance, Zoro potentially being willing to compromise his dreams for the sake of avoiding defeat. It's almost a blasphemous thing to say, I understand. But a lot of people think that Zoro's already sort of put aside everything. He's already essentially faced defeat by submitting to Mihawk, but I've always wondered was that preemptive of Zoro to sort of move the goalpost a little bit, train under Mihawk out of fear of being defeated. He says it himself, I would rather die than be defeated. But at the same time, through the course of the pre-time skip in his journey, he has a connection with the Strats. He has a role to play with the Strats. He wants to help Luffy and crew accomplish their dreams. Their dreams matter as much as his dreams. That puts added pressure on Zoro to always win, to fulfill his promise. Because he knows if the situation arises that he will lose, he will always choose to die. And when he makes this choice, it isn't a failure just for Zoro, it's a failure for the entire crew, because he knows that they need him. And so because of this, he submits himself to Mihawk, training under the very best to get stronger, so that he will never lose. But as it seems to me, Zoro has this sort of idea that the Straw Hats, when facing the Yonko, they need to defeat them all, which means that even though he's defeated his opponent in King, they have to defeat Kaido without retreating. And this is another interesting conversation, right? In any normal arc, Zoro would defeat his opponent and then sort of rest easy, look towards Luffy and believe in him that he will fulfill his role, be his captain, and do the things that he said that he will do. But Zoro's going back in the battlefield. I think it's to go fight Kaido, which is also kind of a low-key admission that Zoro doesn't think that Luffy can defeat Kaido, which is almost like saying that Zoro doesn't believe in Luffy, which is also kind of a Straw Hat sin. Now, of course, a Zoro-tard will tell you that Zoro is always right, so if he has this intuition that Luffy won't defeat Kaido, and that Luffy needs Zoro's help, then Zoro will appear when Luffy needs it, and so it's going to be Zoro's making the correct call. And that may be actually what happens. I don't want to totally dismiss it. But at the same time, there exists the very real possibility that Zoro goes back to help Luffy fight Kaido, or because he doesn't think that Luffy will defeat Kaido, and he's wrong. And Zoro, in the state that he is more of a liability than anything. And or Luffy has decided that this is a thing that he needs to do, no matter how much he struggles, and doesn't want Zoro there. Zoro understands this in most arcs, that Luffy sort of decides upon an opponent, and that's the one he's going to fight. And even if Zoro defeats his opponent before Luffy does, Zoro doesn't intervene, because it's Luffy's fight. As Zoro sometimes jokingly says, well, my captain has to be capable of this, or they shouldn't be my captain. Right now, Luffy versus Kaido seems like Luffy's fight, not Luffy and Zoro's fight. I speculated this earlier, it didn't really work out because Luffy was more than glad to have Zoro's help, but this is just a thing to keep in mind. But anyway, guys, obviously here we're just assuming that Zoro goes to the roof and Luffy versus Kaido. He may not. He may choose to help other Straw Hats be involved in other parts of the island. I personally think that's the right choice, and that may be what he does, making all of this kind of, useless speculation, which it happens. But I am really excited to see where Oda takes it, because I think that there's a lot of potential. A lot of the speculation on my end is really driven by my desire for and my belief in Straw Hat drama during or at the conclusion of this arc. There was a promise from Sanji recently, right, related to this, that I think is on a very similar level. And then in this chapter we see Sanji, he's passed out, but his eyebrows have returned normal. And this is just, it fits with my experience reading One Piece and Oda's habits. Oda introduces an idea that is incredibly hype or exciting, such as, well, will Sanji lose his emotions? Everyone loved that chapter. And then now it's like, oh, well, it's not a big deal. And so everyone's going to forget about it. Oda loves to do that. He introduces an idea, tries to make you forget about it, and then reintroduces it later. That's what I think is going to happen with Sanji. And that sort of vibe, where you have that kind of emotion from Sanji, where maybe he wants to die because he feels himself changing still, works really well with this drama that I'm suggesting about Zoro. They're even thematically related. As Usopp would say, always choose life. We'll figure it out. But anyway, let's get back to the chapter itself. Izo's entrance was just beautiful. I also like the fact that Izo agreed with Usopp. Izo, being from Wano, seems to have the same criticisms of samurai culture, which is fitting when you consider that Izo left Wano to instead join Whitebeard. I think that you get the sense that Izo had some problems with Wano, and I suspect that one of those issues might have been related to trans rights. I don't think that this has been explicitly stated, but we know that Kiku is a man who identifies as a woman. Kiku says that she is a woman at heart, which that's what that means. Izo, however, is a cross-dresser. Izo is a man who dresses like a woman. But so far we get no implication of Izo being a woman at heart. But the actual story behind this and why Izo is the way that he is not fully explained. My personal theory is that Izo chose to dress as a woman, as protection for Kiku. I don't know this, but this makes intuitive sense to me that Kiku likely would have been teased and made fun of and ridiculed for being trans. Bearing in mind that Wano culture is based on Edo period Japan culture, where that definitely would have happened. So I imagine that Izo, as the older brother, started cross-dressing as protection, as a distraction, to sort of take the criticism away from Kiku and put it on himself. Maybe Kiku liked to dress as a woman secretly, and then people found out, they bullied her, and Izo joined in to give her confidence. In this way, his story of cross-dressing would be conceptually similar to like Senor Pink's reason for wearing a diaper. I think it's a powerful story of acceptance. It's like the ultimate older sibling thing to do. Now again, this is the theory. I don't know this, but this is just a story that resonates with me. And so you could see maybe how Izo would grow bitter to the culture and people of Wano. So at a point in which Kiku is old enough to take care of herself, Izo chose not to go back. He liked the culture and the people on Whitebeard's ship more. But anyway, another reason why I like this theory is that I personally believe, and some other people have sort of shared this sentiment earlier, is that Oda has work to do with Izo to restore his reputation, I guess, to the fans. Because even though he desired to go help Wano, at the end of the day, he didn't. And he comes back now, but all this strife that's been taking place in Wano, Izo has essentially ignored. And so I think that, I'm just going to be honest here, I think Izo has death flags, and I think that we might get another flashback from Izo before he dies. And so this would be a perfect opportunity to really establish why we care. And a story like this, I think, would accomplish that. But obviously this is kind of heavy. The scene itself from the chapter was hilarious. Usopp's like, this is it, I'm a goner. And Kiku and Kinemon are like, yes, you're right, just leave us. Let us die. And then Usopp's like, wait, I would love to do that, but that kind of ruins the point. And then the moment where Izo recognizes God Usopp like he knows who he is. Classic. Our boy Usopp has statues. You best remember that. By the end of the story, who's going to be more famous? Usopp or Luffy? Debatable. But anyway, I want to bring up this scene, even though it was short in the chapter. The scene of Fukurokuju and Raizo was just great. I really don't have too much to say. You know, it's just a parallel between Odin boiling and Raizo catching fire. All of this is, it took literally one panel for me to be invested in this fight. But one thing that this chapter does do, I believed this for a long time, but it's gotten to the point of ridiculousness. Where is Denjiro? Denjiro has been missing for dozens of chapters. We have now concluded Sanji and Zoro's fight. Raizo Fukurokuju, that's the last scabbard that really needed a moment, and Denjiro still isn't here. Still hasn't done anything. It has opposite effect, right? Where you're like, sure, that something huge is going to happen with Denjiro. And at this point it has to, because of how much Denjiro has been underutilized in the battle. Denjiro was the person probably I, and many people were most excited for. And then, what has he done during the entire raid in Onigishima? I mean, essentially nothing. Either way, I went back and read some of those Oden chapters, and there's an interesting scene actually where Raizo stops Denjiro from speaking because Oden is sort of saying his last words, and Denjiro is the one scabbard out of all of them who is ready, I think is presented as most ready to die with him. Denjiro wanted to die with Oden. He didn't want to live, which is thematically relevant to the chapter. And I wonder if this will come back up in any way. So there's got to be a moment for him, and maybe it'll relate to Hiyori and Orochi. That was the next part of the chapter. And it is still as weird as the first time that Hiyori was reintroduced in Onigishima. I mean, every time it's a surreal feeling. This scene of Hiyori playing her little instrument and Orochi relaxing as the castle is burning down is so freaking surreal. Have myself rubbing my eyes is this what's actually occurring right now? I really have nothing to say other than, why is Hiyori just playing her little instrument? Why is she so patient? What is she waiting for? I guess that's the big one. You could stab Orochi in the back by now. What are you waiting for? The next part showed CP0 defeat Drake, and we also see Appu get away. And I said this actually a couple chapters ago when CP0 first encountered X-Drake and Appu. I thought that Appu would escape with knowledge about what CP0 has been doing, and that seems to be the direction it's going. I know a lot of people are sort of interested in the results of the battle of X-Drake and CP0. I'll be honest, guys, I thought that CP0 would be much stronger than Drake than it appears that they were, because X-Drake was able to damage the leader of CP0. At the same time, I've heard people say that they're surprised that X-Drake wasn't able to put up as much of a fight, which goes to show you just how perfect and sciencey power scaling is. Obviously, we had no idea, so this is the first real fight that we've seen that we can judge. And from this, I'm gathering that CP0 is not as strong as I thought. And for some people, they are stronger than they thought. But regardless, it's interesting that they didn't appear to double tap X-Drake. X-Drake looks dead. He's not dead, obviously. They could have just cut off his head, right? I mean, that's kind of brutal. But realistically, right, it's okay, we want to make sure that this guy doesn't leave Onigishima, do more, right? Double tap, okay, make sure that he dies. But no, X-Drake will get back up and play some role at some point in time. This is another one of those moments I feel like Oda was basically going to make you forget about X-Drake until X-Drake does something important later. For instance, I can imagine X-Drake playing a pivotal role saving Luffy after he defeats Kaido. They need a way out of the island. I could see X-Drake assisting. But during the scene, CP0 is on the phone and they ask, have you captured Nico Robin? And they said, not yet, something came up. And then they say, you need to get out of the castle quickly. The All-Stars have been wiped out. The whole tone of this conversation was really strange to me, because why does CP0 need to get out of the castle in the case that the Straw Hats win? This whole conversation is, you need to get out of the castle quickly, the All-Stars have been wiped out, the odds of this new generation winning are 1,000,000 to 1, but you gotta get prepared for that. It would make sense if they were like, well, you need to get out of the castle because it's about to explode. That's not really said, so I was just a little confused about that. Then my mind goes total conspiracy mode, where it's well, CP0 needs to leave Wano in the case the Strats win because of, and the pieces start moving. and then my brain shuts down. So that's where we're at. But they reiterate that their objective right now is to capture Nico Robin, and that is a plot point that I am still very interested in. I think a lot of people take it for granted that Nico Robin will be saved, protected, that the Strats will rebuff any attempt to try and get her. I'm not so sure, so, we'll see what Oda has in store. The only other thing from this conversation that I felt like was noteworthy, and I'm not entirely sure if it is, but at the very end of this conversation, one of the CP0 agents says, "Understood. But humans can't push themselves forever. Surely they've already reached their limit." I assume it's Cypherpole saying this and not Kaido, because we do change scenes immediately to Kaido versus Luffy, but it doesn't really make sense from that perspective. We'll see. We'll wait for the official translation, obviously read that and compare. But if this is actually what's being said here, then CP0 is claiming to not be human. I think the obvious speculation is that members of Cypherpole Zero consider themselves to be extensions of the Celestial Dragons, who also consider themselves to be above regular humans. But something about that caught my attention. I'm still waiting for members of CP0 to be unmasked, because, it doesn't have to be vital or important in any way, but feels like it could be. Surely humans can't push themselves forever. A random thought I had was, how do they select members of the Gorosei, right? Gorosei are also supposed to be celestial dragons, but how do you apply? How do they decide who's a Gorosei and who's not? And we see several of the Gorosei, and they have battle scars, like they fought, which is very uncelestial dragon-like. So it makes me wonder about celestial dragons potentially as members of Cypherpole and Cypherpole Zero, and then using that as a springboard to become a Gorosei later, or something like that. And lastly, we finish off with a fight of Kaido and Luffy and some conversation. Pretty standard end to a chapter, ends with the dawn sort of thing of feeling like One Piece vibes. That's how I felt. But nothing much to discuss, just, Luffy is fighting like an equal with a Yonko. I mean, Luffy is Yonko level, period. But anyway, guys, I thought that this was an incredible chapter, and I cannot wait for the next one. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think, whether you noticed something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.